Hello, and welcome to another episode of the ManageEngine Insights podcast. I am Navina Srinivas, an enterprise analyst at ManageEngine. In today's episode, we are going to explore the topic of data security through the compliance lens. As globalization takes shape and government regulations spreads across borders, the issue of compliance risk remains a top-level business issue. Growing concerns over consumer privacy and data security has prompted a rush of legislation intended at holding corporations more accountable for maintaining and sharing the information they collect about consumers. As per a research survey by Metric Stream, organizations aim to focus on three areas of compliance in the future: improving regulatory and internal compliance evaluations, raising third-party compliance, and improving employee awareness with more compliance training. Given the speed and scope of change, senior executives and board members are more anxious than ever that traditional and reactive approaches to compliance management will force them to lag the market or expose them to greater regulatory or reputational risk than ever before. It's clear that there's no turning back to the days when compliance was relegated to the back of the list of priorities. So, to understand and explore the different challenges enterprises face on their compliance journey, I'm pleased to be joined by Mr. Punit Bhatia, the founder and CEO of Fit for Privacy. Punit is regarded as one of the leading privacy experts who has worked with professionals in over 30 countries. He has worked closely with CXOs and DPOs to create and implement privacy strategies. With his 20 years of experience and proven expertise in areas of data protection, privacy, sourcing, and vendor management, he has written 4 privacy books and is also the creator and host of the Fit for Privacy podcast, which is ranked amongst the top GDPR podcasts from 2020 to 2022. Punit is also a board member of the ISACA Belgium chapter and DPO Circle. Most importantly, Punit is also known to use simple business language while avoiding the legal jargon, which I'm sure is the need of the hour. Hello, Punit. It's a pleasure to have you here with us today.
Hi, Navina. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm looking forward to it.
The pleasure is all ours, Punit. So let's get started with the first question for today. So from your perspective, how do you think enterprises can ensure compliance, and what do you think is standing in their way from being fully compliant? And is there a way to simplify and make compliance more approachable for employees?
Well, that's a loaded question. Let me bring it into pieces. First, how do you ensure compliance? I think you start with the top. The management needs to understand, the management needs to assess, and management needs to plan. So what it means is you cannot say we will hire consultants, or we will hire a DPO, or we will hire a compliance champion or compliance manager or head of compliance, and they will do it. You need to do it with them. So you need to be part of it. It's a business choice rather than a compliance decision. So you understand what it is, you assess it, and from there you have the gaps, and then you make a plan. And when you make a plan, you mentioned the other part, how do you make it approachable for employees? So that part is you need to engage your employees. If the management at the top is aligned, is showing commitment, and then you have scenario-based trainings. Like, let's imagine most companies, what they would do is if they have to do a security training or privacy training or any compliance training, what they will say is, this is an online training, 30 minutes, everyone has to do it. It is mandatory. Of course, it is mandatory. But then for an employee in procurement versus employee in HR versus employee who's at front desk or customer services, they have different needs. Now, what you're telling them is this is privacy, this is security, this is compliance, and they don't understand it because they are more interested in doing their job. And you have to link it to their job. Like the procurement guy, you mentioned third-party risk. So you have to help them understand third-party risk. The employee or the front end, the guy in the customer support, you have to help him. How does he have to talk to customers? What does he have to pick up? So you need to create scenario-based engagement with staff. And then you had the question of being fully compliant. In my personal view and experience, well, there's nothing called fully compliant. You take your best effort, you do your best, and you mitigate the risk. And there's always a certain level of risk which remains. So I won't say 100% compliance. You take a risk-based approach, mitigate the risks, and continually monitor that risk. That's why if it was fully compliant, you would hire a compliance officer, and after a few months or years, you would say, now we are compliant, let's stop it. It doesn't work like that. So it's an
Very good.
ongoing process. Yes, you need project which closes the gaps that you have assessed, but then at a certain point, it needs to be made sustainable. And that's where ongoing review of risks is very important.
Correct. Absolutely. I completely understand when you said we need scenario-based training, and it's not the same for everybody. I think it has to be more personalized according to their roles. I think that's what you meant, Puneet.
Exactly.
So,
So rather than saying privacy training for company X, we have to say privacy training for procurement, privacy training for human resources, privacy training for marketing, privacy training for front desk. That's how you have to slice. And of course, there can be a privacy training general if someone wants to understand generically, but then this training, the specific for each job, each department allows them to get in the perspective which is relevant to their department and the day-to-day scenarios they face.
correct. On that note, Puneet, the next question we have for you is, as a privacy and compliance expert, could you please share a few complex situations where the needs of the team clashed with the GDPR rules?
That's a very good question. Normally, I won't say there's any situation in which the needs are clashing. The law has, or the compliance rules have certain requirements, and at times the business or the departments do not understand, and they are more biased with what they are looking to achieve, and hence it seems like from a distance that the needs are clashing, but they don't clash. They are usually the same, but you have to discover it. But I'll give you a few examples to specify that. Like, once I was working with the marketing team and the GDPR was coming, they had implemented a privacy notice on the website, and it was being ranked the best in the country and so on, and they were getting awards. Now, because of GDPR, we needed to upgrade or update this privacy notice. Naturally, from the business perspective, marketing perspective, their thing was, it's doing so well, we are the best in this country, why do we need to upgrade? It's natural. Now, from a legal perspective or compliance perspective, we wanted to update it to be compliant with GDPR, but they didn't get that message. So they were very defensive. We don't want to do it. It's not needed. It has been done 1 year ago. It's the best in the market, all those reasons. And we didn't change any business process. Of course, you did not. But then with the GDPR, we had these consent rules, the transparency rules, the cookie rules, and that's what we needed to incorporate. So I had to get in, put the legal and the marketing person together and make them explain. And both were talking their own stuff. The marketing talking about it's very good and legal talking about it's needed. So I jumped in and I said, guys, end of the day, both of you want the company to be safe. The legal wants to protect it and marketing wants more clients, but you want more clients or more branding in context of the law, not outside. Yes, that's true. And that's why you published a privacy notice, because you didn't need to a few months ago. Yes. Now you are concerned that privacy notice that we will publish would be disrupting the market positioning you've got. And then they said, yes. And I said, but you have two choices. Legally, he needs to update it. If he writes it, he will write exactly what you fear. A privacy notice, which will be legally written and not the best in class as you want it. So why doesn't it make sense? We collaborate and we discuss these are the 3 or 4, 5 points to change. Your management team in marketing changes it, or the person who made the previous changes changes it, and the legal reviews it. And I promise you, we will write it in a business friendly way. Of course, it was not as simple as I explained. It took about an hour and a couple of meetings of those hours. But then we negotiated. So it was not the need that marketing had was clashing. It was the perspective. Because sometimes business doesn't understand the criticality and they're not aware. And we in compliance or risk or legal think they're not listening. But if you take a step back, look at the objectives, the values they are having and why they are doing. And that's the same every time it happens. I mean, I was working with a US client a few months ago, and they wanted to do an EU launch. Now, for them,
Okay.
the GDPR compliance was an overhead, of course.
Okay.
But, and they were like, we want to get compliant in 60 days. I said, congratulations, you will not be. And then
Right.
they said, no, but some other consultants or some other consulting firm is telling them. I said, go ahead, hire them. Why are you talking to me? So it's not that the needs are conflicting. They wanted to roll out in 3 months. That's all. So you
Right.
have to help them. How do you roll out? Not in a GDPR compliant way, but in a GDPR ready way, so that when they get into the market, they have a defensible position. And of course, everyone knows data retention, data deletion, data subject rights. These are complex matters and you need to put in internal processes. You can't put them in 30 days or 60 days. But
Right.
you can
Absolutely.
certainly perform an assessment. You can certainly have a list of risks. You can certainly know your risk posture and then take care of the high priority and high severity risks. And if you do that, you start with a defensible position. So cutting long story short, I think business thinks in business way, compliance thinks in compliance way, and that makes us feel the needs are conflicting, but the needs are same. The reason business
Right.
is saying we want to be GDPR compliant before we go to EU means they want to be compliant. But their thinking is just like business, tick, 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 compliance, tick, 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 and we will be compliant. That's where the gap is. It's the way we approach things.
That makes complete sense to me. Absolutely. This is not something that we can just have a deadline and we're done for once and we're compliant now and we can't just move on. We have to be constantly updated, and definitely completely agree with you. On that note, I have a situation based of a question for you. So are there ever situations where the privacy policies of the data processors that differ with the privacy policies of the data controllers? For example, when the privacy policy of the event organizer could be different from that of the company, which will use the attendees' data. How do you think organizations can navigate such situations?
So first and foremost, let's align on the terminology. I think when we are using the word privacy policy means their approach to managing privacy, an organization, how they manage, because sometimes, especially in the US companies, what we say is privacy policy is the one which is published on the website, while in the US EU parlance, we call it the privacy notice or statement. So here we are saying privacy policy, meaning the way a company is approaching privacy and the set of rules they define for themselves. And when you say, are there situations these are different? I would say they are always different, because just like every country passes privacy law and they're still protecting privacy of individuals, but they do it differently. They have the rights, they have the consent rules, they have the legitimate basis and so on, but they write it differently, they define different rights and name them differently, like right to be forgotten, deleted, or erasure. What's in it? It's the same, but they tend to create nuances. So yes, policies are always different because each company's business model is different. Each company is operating in different regions. So to comply with legislation in different regions, comply with or make sure they are compliant in context of their business, like data processor and data controller usually have different business models. So they will have a different approach to policies. Behind the scenes, the principles, the objectives are same. So yes, they're always different. Now coming to the complex matter of event organizers and attendees, well, they're different models, but the simplest model is always focus on transparency and ask for consent. If you are transparent, if you are asking consent, there may be some, I would say, reduction in number of consents you will have on the data you will have, but you'll at least have good quality data. And you need to focus on good quality data. You don't want 100,000 prospects or suspects. You want suspects who will convert into customers. So that's where we need to focus on.
Absolutely. That was a very insightful discussion and the conversation on that for me. Actually, the next question was based on what you said earlier. We all know that compliance is the right thing to do, but like the example that you told about the marketing team, they can see compliance as a deterrent to their everyday business functions. For example, when they try to get, consent from potential leads at events. I think that quite answers your the question that you. What do you think is your perspective on that? When the marketing team thinks that, or any other team for that matter, they see compliance as a deterrent to their business functions.
I mean, if you look at the number of leads, number of prospects, number of emails, you would feel like, yes, compliance has reduced my numbers. I was having 100,000, now I have 50,000. Yes, at that level, from that lens, yes, compliance is being a deterrent. But what you need to look at is the conversions. Now, would you like to have someone who's not interested in your product, not looking to buy it, and not looking to even make a decision in coming months to be receiving emails? And anyhow, when they receive emails, they would either delete them or feel annoyed. So you don't want dissatisfied customers. You want satisfied customers. So how about before launching a campaign that's called permission marketing, one step further than what I said, you send a small email, very nice article talking about what the need is. And if the person reads it, in the end, say, if you like this message, if you like what we talked about, we are launching a product which is going to solve these challenges. Would you like to receive information about that? Now, when you click on that, then you know certainly that you have a hot lead. You're not looking for suspects or prospects. You got a hot lead. And then your conversion process is much more targeted and simple. And I receive maybe 10 to 20, I mean, I limit down my subscriptions, these messages, but there's only one person who sends me a message every 2 weeks with a permission marketing. And I know when I click that, I'm most likely going to buy that product, because that's already, you are doing a fabulous job in filtering out people rather than having building a database. And that way, the person has still the full database because all the people are there, but he uses it sparingly to create permission, to ask permission for the type of product. And that's how the event organizers or others can share it. You don't need data. You need quality data and quality leads.
That was actually very insightful, Puneet. This is my first time listening about permission marketing, and it was very insightful. Thank you for that answer, Puneet. So changing the perspective a little, we wanted to discuss about legitimate interest, one of the most flexible bases in the GDPR. So can organizations use legitimate interest while processing the employees' data?
Well, that is debatable. In my personal view, at least in the GDPR or most privacy laws, there are different bases on which you can process personal data. And one of them always is contract. And employees usually are hired based on an employment contract. I am not aware of any country wherein you say you are my employee and there is no contract. So rather than trying to find legitimate interest as a basis, I would choose to go for employment contract, because one, legitimate interest, when you choose, it can be challenged. It has to be judged and it's open to scrutiny. While when we are using the contract, it is firm, because when the person is onboarding, you are transparently saying, this is what we do. Now, I do understand that at a certain point, you have employment contracts which are 30 years old or 40 years old. And now you want to introduce new ways of processing, like because of COVID, you want to introduce more scanning at the entrance, temperature checks. So in those cases, you issue an addendum to the contract, but still rely on contract because that's a safer option. Legitimate interest, it's a debatable option. And I like to go for the simpler, sustainable options. But if, let's say we were in the COVID situation and you need to do something urgently, it's not possible to immediately change things, then you can of course rely on legitimate interest. But there also, I would choose compliance with law, because if you know, it's employer's moral responsibility to protect the premises as well as the employees. And that is stated in most laws. that you as an organization, you as an employer will provide a safe working place. Now, when the COVID came up, it is providing a safe working place. And in that context, to comply with that law, you need to check the temperature, you need to ask for some medical history. So rather than rushing to legitimate interest, so for me, in the order of priority, I always try to rely on contract, then the compliance. And in terms of the last ones, the legitimate interest, and even later one is consent, because consent is even more tricky and dangerous from my perspective, because you ask consent, you start processing, you send data to a data processor, then someone comes in and saying, I don't consent. Now, are you going to bring that data back? I wish. So start with contract, then the compliance, and then of course, all other means are there for an organization. But your question very specifically, employment data or employee data processing, first preference in privacy context is an employment contract.
Right. That was a very well constructed answer, Puneet. I'm sure our audience will be enlightened by this. Thank you for that.
You're so
And
kind.
you're welcome. Okay, so moving on to the next question. Since we have seen a lot of digital transformation in the last couple of years, it was massive. And what do you think are the few alterations in the organization's privacy policies that the enterprises should keep in mind while adopting, new technologies or changing their system structures? For example, when organizations were forced to adopt to cloud technologies during the dawn of remote work, how do you think it affected the privacy policies of the enterprises?
Well, privacy policies, approaches, and requirements always evolve with the context. So as we went for more digitization, more remote working, more hybrid working, I think all policies, right from employment policy to privacy policy or any other policy, have gone through a transformation, have gone through a big change. So in an employment contract, remote working was not even allowed or rarely allowed.
Yeah.
Or you were saying 1 day a week, half a day a week. Is there a reason? Can the employee do it? All those things. The same way with privacy policies, the approach was it's all on premise. Everything is happening here. Remote is an exception. While now remote or hybrid is the norm or even the primary thing. So yes, it did need to evolve, and even we needed to evolve the data retention. Normally we were saying you print your papers, you shred them, as simple as that. Now, would the employee print at home? Would you allow them to print at home? Maybe. Would they shred? How? So I've seen some companies saying you can print at home or you can print in office and take home, but afterwards you can send a courier, especially for the executives, to shred them securely to the shredder. So rather than receiving in office, you send it to shredder. But then again, introducing a new risk. What if in the courier the data is leaked or data is breached? So yes, these new scenarios have come up. Policies have evolved and evolved in a good way, because going forward, the world is going to be more digital. And as it becomes more digital, we will need to review it. And we will continue to review it, because as we go along, I mean, things will change and then we will adapt. But the good part is, the positive part is, the policies are driven based on principles. The principles of privacy or of compliance have not changed in last 30, 40 years. I mean, if you look at the FIPS, the Fair Information Privacy Practices, or the OECD privacy principles, they were in 1970s or 80s, and they were talking about transparency, consent, basis for processing, rights, and we're still doing those things. The only thing is their application and application has changed significantly because of the context, because context is digital, context is complex, and now context is remote. And in the remote, we are also seeing a new dimension of remote, wherein it can be remote in any location, any region. So as it happens, there will be more evolution.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that answer, Puneet. So since we were talking about digital transformation, we wanted to touch upon the topic of automation and AI. So how do you think AI will affect our privacy, and what are your views on ethical AI?
In my view, AI is
Mm,
already there and has been there
mm,
for 50, 60 years or even more.
correct.
Because
Mm,
in 1960s, when the big computers came in, we said it's automatic,
mm,
it's automated.
mm,
Then the tapes came in and we said it's automated, voice is recorded and it's happening
mm,
automatically. The
right.
definition of artificial intelligence is changing. And now, of course, artificial intelligence means the computer makes some decisions for you based
Mm,
on learning. And there, things are changing, but there's nothing called static. It will keep changing. The digital world will evolve, and the digital world, especially the AI world, thrives on data, because data
mm.
is the fuel which drives this AI economy or digital
Right,
economy.
right, right. Yeah.
And as we talk about data, it comes to managing data based on principles and complying with them. And when you say ethical AI, that a
Mm,
little bit is challenging for me, because ethics are different in different parts of world. Ethics are driven
correct.
based on
Makes
culture,
sense.
ethics are driven
Mm,
based on society. I mean, I have usually heard a joke saying, when Microsoft sells CDs and were distributing the Windows,
mm,
usually in US they will say it's copyright, I should not give it to you. But then there were some countries in
okay.
Asia, the joke was, uh, do you have the copyright? Yes, it says copyright, you can copy it. So now, while
Right, right.
copyright for someone means you should not copy, the right to copy is with someone else. There, I have the copyright, you can
Mm,
copy it as many times as you want. So it is contextual. Ethical AI is certainly
mm,
the need, but we need to define the parameters, the boundaries, the rules, the
yeah.
regulations around how AI should be conducted. And that's where most economies are taking steps in that direction. Most countries, most regions have published their regulations.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely get where you're coming from about the ethical AI and different parts of the world having different, parameters and different opinions on their views of, having it ethically fit. So we're coming to the last question of the session for me. So since we were talking about AI and ethical AIs, do you think the current frameworks for AI governance and development are effective enough? Because the PDPC of Singapore recently launched the AI Verify for AI governance, I think in May.
Yeah.
So what are your views on that?
I mean, it's a good framework. It's a step
Mm,
in the right direction because it helps verify or put in a model for governance and testing of AI. So it's needed.
mm,
All the same,
mm,
when we look at the models, well, there was a philosopher who said all models are wrong and all models are right.
mm,
So it really depends on how you look at them. The people who create those models and framework, they think they're right, but when you apply them to context or situation, they tend to be different. Because like the Singapore Verify, I don't know how you look at it, but the way I look at it is, in the
mm.
Singapore context, it will work. Maybe in the Chinese
Okay,
context or the US context, it may not work because it's following
right.
the rules which are applicable in Singapore. So that's why, from my perspective, as I always say in the book, AI and Privacy, How to Find Balance,
Mm,
the one wherein we
mm,
talk about all these dimensions, the simple approach
right,
is,
right.
you as a company are operating in a domain or a industry, and then you're operating in different countries. Now you cannot comply with the AI regulation in EU, the AI verify in Singapore, then the AI regulation in China and the US. So what you need to do is, you need to take the best of everything that is applicable to you in your industry, create a framework internal, like we say privacy policy, you create an AI policy or AI
Right.
principles, then set up a team which will oversee that. And then for the launch of Singapore product, you use AI verify. For the China product, you use
Okay.
the Chinese regulation. And then internally as an
Right.
organization, you have a comprehensive, holistic approach to managing AI. And it will intersect
Right.
with privacy, it will intersect with other compliance domains. And that's where you will set
Mm,
up the governance, wherein all parties, like AI governance, I would say you need to have legal on the table. They need to have a seat. You also need finance because
Yeah.
AI is finance driven, and you need business because that's where business benefits. And then you need compliance, and you need risk, and you need privacy. So all of them need a seat because they bring in different perspective. And when you set up that holistic governance, along with a set of rules or principles or a framework that you have for your own organization based on the context that you are operating in, that's the right way. But all these are welcome. The AI verify is welcome. The EU regulation is welcome. Every regulation is welcome because they look at that jurisdiction. But from an organization standpoint, we need to take a step back and look at how do we comply holistically.
Right. I think based on our entire conversation, I think there are a lot of regulations and everything, but I think it comes down to personalizing it and, how it works for us in a particular region or an organization. I think they have to take it up and check, and obviously we have to check if it's compliant and all of that, and personalize it according to our needs and the consumers. I think that is what is more important, I feel. Because throughout the world there's going to be a lot of compliance and a lot of laws and a lot of governance is going to come up, but personalizing it according to the needs of the particular organization or a region is most important.
Very well said, Navina. Exactly. Look at the industry you are in, look at the countries you operate, take a snapshot of the laws or regulations in those, make your own approach, holistic approach and policy, and implement that, and then demonstrate compliance on local, regional level.
Thank you, Punit. And this brings us to the end of today's conversation. Thank you once again for such an enlightening discussion, Punit. It was an insightful conversation, and I'm sure our viewers are going to take away a better understanding of how enterprises can manage their compliance journey.
Thank you so much, Navina. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Puneet, and thank you everyone for tuning into this conversation. We will soon be back with another episode for our podcast. Until then, you can reach us at insights@manageengine.com.